And then let me just pull up the chat over here on my phone so that I'm cognizant of what the peoples are doing and making sure that, okay, cool. This looks live. Let's see if we have sound. Yes, it is. Fabulous. Thank you. All right. Turn the sound down there. There we go. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so very much, everyone, for being here. I see we've got some early enterers into the room. Welcome, all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Kay Moon. I'm a twin flame channel and Western astrologer. And this, it says they're telling me my sound isn't working well. Okay, can everyone else hear me? Let's just get a quick read on sound. PL can hear me. Okay. All right. All right. Well, okay, cool. So you guys just may need to adjust on your end if you can't hear, but I think we're all right on sound. Yeah, so my name is Kay Moon. I'm a twin flame channel and Western astrologer, and I'm joined today by special guest Katherine Woodward Thomas to do a conversation together today about her work called Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After, How to Break Up in a Whole New Way. This I felt was a very important addition to the Tools for Union series because I spend quite a lot of time in private session with divine counterparts who find themselves married to someone who they don't feel is their divine counterpart, a soulmate, or someone else. And one of the things that I've noticed in the conversation most often is a paralysis around staying or going, being either fully in to the relationship they're in with their whole heart, informed by the love that has awakened them by their twin soul, or releasing and moving forward to allow that caliber of love to land in a romantic partnership at a later date and time, either with their twin soul or someone else. So that paralysis really inspired me to say, okay, there's something that happens at the decision point to leave or complete a relationship that causes us to stop moving, stop breathing, stop being authentic and real. There's also something that we, collectively have, many of us have experienced, either a bad breakup or witnessing a bad breakup and the trauma that can ensue there. So when Katherine came out with the work Conscious Uncoupling, my guidance was create tools for union, I was like, I have to have her on the channel. This has to be a part of our conversation. How do we allow ourselves to create the clarity about what we need to do for our connection? And how do we, once we have that clarity, move forward in a way that is loving to ourselves and those we love? So Katherine is the author of, as I said, New York Times bestseller, Conscious Uncoupling. She's also the author of national bestseller, Calling in the One, 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and teacher to thousands from all corners of the world in her virtual and in-person learning communities, which we'll be sharing a little bit about for you today. And she's also a featured teacher of Mindvalley, the online transformational educational giant. She trains, credentials, and supervises people as certified conscious uncoupling coaches and as certified Calling in the One coaches, and supports them to develop thriving private practices as love and relationship coaches. So, Katherine, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kay. It's so lovely to be with you. Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. So just as a way of kind of grounding the audience a little bit into today's conversation, what was your come from? What inspired you to write this book?
Well, I think it's to minimize suffering, truthfully. I mean, I certainly had a lot of bad breakups in my own life, and one in particular that I suffered with what I now know is called prolonged grief for decades, for well over 20 years, dreaming about the person I'd broken up with and missing him at various times and always feeling like the imprint of him at the deepest level, and in a way that was preventing me from moving forward and from being able to create love in my life at that point. He had already married someone else, had children with them, so he was not even in my life, but I felt so connected to him. And I've been a relationship teacher now, teacher for about love since my first book came out, Calling in the One, in 2004. And I'm also a marriage and family therapist. So relationship is my area of inquiry. And one of the things that always fascinated me was the deep sense of connection that we can have, even though the physical bond is no longer present. And so this kind of non-local connection, and which I think is very true for many of us who have these very deep twin flame kind of loves, where we do have we kind of even wrap our identities around each other in some way. So when we have a separation, um, there's not a lot of tools that we have. Nature has not quite caught up with our culture. You know, when the happily ever after myth was created, the lifespan was less than 40. And the lifestyle was very, very different than our lifestyles today, where we have mobility and choices, and we live longer, and we have Viagra and hormone replacements and all sorts of things that keep us romantically and sexually juicy well into our 80s. And for those who are in their 90s and still want to be, lots of hope for that too. So we live in a really different time where happily ever after is not the norm, but actually serial monogamy is. That's not me promoting serial monogamy. It's just what's so when you do the statistics. And most of us are slated to have two or three significant partners in our lifetime. So, how do we consciously complete in a way that liberates our heart to love fully moving forward? So, having had that deep experience of prolonged loss that I felt like I could never quite get over, the suffering foiled against when I was able to complete with my husband, who I now affectionately call my husband, in a pretty healthy way that really brought closure and completion and left me more equipped to be happy and love moving forward. I wanted to share that with people and give us really the tools to be able to consciously complete a relationship in a way that leaves our hearts whole and free to love and be loved moving forward.
Beautiful. Thank you for that clarification and explanation. I really like that you made the distinction between to utilize the word complete versus breaking up. That's a conscious choice. And I'm just curious, can you orient us to the language of completion? Why that word?
Well, it's interesting. Break up is such
Mhm.
it really names the violence of separation, the severing of it, the brokenness of it. And our language around separation tends to be about a broken heart, a home wrecker. You know, we have language that really kind of names how violent separation occurs for us. And I think it's a new way of looking at it, to what does it look like to actually be complete with someone. And what completion means is that your life is not lessened by the loss of love, by the awareness of our own vulnerability to heartbreak and what happens, and how tender our hearts are. Many do go on to live a lesser life in the aftermath of an ending of love. Then and I've met many people who've had 5 years alone, 10 years alone, 20 years alone, 30 years alone, or love at a distance after a bad breakup with a real soul partner. We are tender creatures. Once our hearts are broken, we certainly never want to go through that experience again. So part of the wonderful process that we're all in of improving life, of creating life as we go, of taking in new information to improve our healthy habits for sleep and our healthy habits for good eating and for exercise and for child rearing is, also kind of growing our capacity to do relationship in a healthy way. And so the stretch for us is to learn, like, what are the tools where you're actually complete with someone, you're at peace with someone. When you think of them, maybe with a twinge of sadness, but also a twinge of gratitude and a twinge of blessing them in your heart. You hope that they're well. So you're not stewing in resentment. You're not left with the residue of how unfair it was or how much it cost you. You're not left with the imprint that that person made in a way that no one else can ever feel again. But you're actually enhanced by the experience and the love. You feel expanded by having known that person, having had that precious, sacred encounter, by the wisdom that you gained from the mistakes that were made, theirs and yours. But the wisdom that you now pay forward in how you live your life and how you love the people that you're given to love. So completion is a very different experience than a breakup, and conscious completion is a new skill set that we don't quite yet have. I think inside of the happily ever after myth, where we just assume that the end of a relationship is a quote unquote failure, because we're all kind of aspiring to uh, the holy grail of living happily ever after with one true love. I think that we have really failed to evolve ourselves in this way. That not all relationships are meant to last a lifetime, that we do have choices in the postmodern world that were not given to our ancestors, and that those choices come with an obligation to now grow ourselves to be stronger and more capable of being able to move towards how to end relationships in a way that is peaceful. There's a quote that I have in Conscious Uncoupling book by Merritt Malloy: relationships that do not end consciously do not end at all. So we
Mm.
need to bring that conscious closure. Now, for some relationships, we're talking about twin flames in this community. In some relationships, when you have a twin flame, on some level, it always lives within our hearts and soul. But the way you want it to be living in your heart and soul, if you've ended the physical connection, which very often happens with a very deep soul connection, is not necessarily bad and wrong. But the way you want it to live is that you feel that that connection is giving you life as opposed to taking it away from you. Even in the separation, that there's a sense of peace between you, that there's a sense of goodwill that is in the connection between you, where you're still rooting for each other, sending each other blessings, sending each other love, even blessing the choice to love someone else in this lifetime. That's what's possible when we do this well.
So beautifully stated. Thank you. I really appreciate that expanded perspective on what it means to move through completion and initiation and those cycles in love. Thank you. Okay, so rolling up our sleeves, then, conscious completion, whether it is with a soulmate, a twin soul, who knows what. How does it work? In the book Conscious Uncoupling, you lay out 5 steps, but even before the 5 steps, you actually lay out some pre-steps, some things we need to think about before we decide to take the path of consciously uncoupling. Would you mind just giving us an overview here of the lay of the land?
Definitely. And I think it's, first of all, one of the things I lay out in the beginning of the book is I explain our own biology and how our biology hasn't caught up to our culture. So, in other words, we are hardwired to bond. We are relational creatures. Um, Neuroscience can now show us that when we're close to others, that we begin to regulate each other. We regulate each other, excuse me, psychologically for sure, and emotionally, but also physically. So our body temperatures will start to sync up with the body temperature of um, our uh, closest connections. Our heart rates will start to sync with the heart rates of others. Our blood pressure, all of our body functions, but certainly our emotions. We regulate each other. And what I mean by regulate is that we calm each other down. We are the safety of each other. That's how nature designed safety. In some regards, our relationship with each other is actually the only safety we really get in life. So when that relational home ends or is severed, we go into quite a shock. We go into fight or flight, and all of the hormones in the body that get released are really hormones that get released in a trauma. One of the bizarre things that happens in our hormones when we have a breakup with someone is that our body begins to form the hormones and flood our bodies with the hormones that we first felt when we initially fell in love. Now, that's almost counterinstinctive because you'd think that the body would start doing a self protective mechanism and start to lessen the importance of that person. But what it does is it actually increases the importance of that person. So it heightens our desire for that person. And I think that that's the body's way of ensuring that we run after that person to get that person to not leave us. So the body and the brain are hardwired to stay connected. Nature does not like breakups. So very often what happens in that atmosphere, if the breakup is inevitable, is that we will go from soulmate to soul hate, because hate is a high form of engagement. Very, very engaged. With that person, it's like the shadow side of love. So that's when you are ruminating on that person and you're telling that person off, or you're wishing that person harm, or you're stalking that person on the social media and having fantasies of other people seeing what they did to you. That's still a very, very, very strong bond. So conscious uncoupling is about minimizing that bond. So we have to start where you are. And part of that is to understand these big emotions and to actually find a way to transform the negative energy into the forces of positive change. So that's the first step in conscious uncoupling. Now, some people, are not feeling the intensity of those emotions, mostly the person who left the relationship, because the person who left the relationship is someone who has had a chance to form an identity outside of the bond, is already visioning life beyond the relationship, is starting to create a new life internally where they're not so dependent on the bond for their identity and for their emotional regulation. They're starting to create maybe new bonds outside of the relationship already as a safety net, as a place to go. So they're in a better position. The person who's most suffering is the person who's been left. And that can be quite a shocking experience, even if the other person was telling you they were going to leave. So, or even if you saw that it might happen. So it's to understand the vulnerability of what it is to be human, the newness of what it is to break up in a conscious way, the decision to break up in a conscious way. Why? Because you don't want to damage your children. You really are an ethical person. You actually don't want to do harm to someone just because you feel hurt by them. And you also don't want to damage your chances for love moving forward, right? So there's a lot of motivation that we might have to do this well. And so I invite people to really consider what's at stake. How, and by the way, the things that's happening in the external world while someone is in this state of shock is that we're making very big decisions about how to separate money, or where, who gets custody and where the children are going to go, and if there's kids involved. So there's big decisions that are being made. And if we just act from our emotions at this time, we can really create a lot of karma that cannot get undone. We can put things in motion that we might never be able to really resolve moving forward. Many a word are spoken during this heightened state of passion that we regret or feel ashamed of down the line. We feel embarrassed. You want to key someone's car because you're so enraged. You want to put bleach all over their suits and, throw them out, hurl all their clothes out the window, all that kind of, huge emotions. But, we want to do things in a way where we're not actually creating damage that we can never repair. Certainly if there's other people involved that we don't want to harm. So how do we do that in a way where we're not just repressing those emotions? Well, if you're mad, it's probably for good reason, that you have been violated in some deep way. Somebody lied, or somebody withheld information, or made a promise and didn't keep it. And you have a right to feel the violation at that level, because there's something that's wanting to wake up in you, and that has to do with the reclamation of your right to be treated with respect, to be told the truth, to be considered, to be honored. All of those things are good and wholesome. And if you can take the energy of the rage and move it in the direction of that positive intention, from this moment forward, I'm done with abusive dynamics. No more narcissists. From this moment forward, I will be treated with the respect that I deserve to have, right? You set a positive intention for how this is going to go, and recognizing that you will probably need to outgrow the person you were when you created that dynamic.
Mm.
That person might be your soulmate and your twin flame, but you still have personality structures that you're dealing with, and ego structures that have been wounded, that have been carrying toxic patterns since childhood into the space. And this is the time where that ends. And very often I think soulmates come into our lives, twin flames come into our lives, because it's time for us to rise into a healthier version of ourselves, and they crack us open. And the gift of a broken heart is that you really are broken open, and you have nowhere to go but to look at yourself and to grow beyond this pattern. If you're a person who's allowed narcissistic dynamics to take root, or you're a person who's gotten involved with people who need rescuing, or you're a person who's gotten involved with people who are really unavailable to be present for you, that pattern has to stop. There's only so far you're going to get in life with that pattern. And it no longer serves you, and life is, like, no kidding, now going to graduate you from that.
Mm.
So the first step is to really take that seriously, the opportunity to grow yourself to the next level. Step 2 is about the reclamation of your power, which always has to do with being responsible for your part. Power and responsibility are two different sides of the same coin. And I think where we get into trouble is that, where if you're traumatized, you're blaming the other person in your mind a lot. You're kind of ruminating and trying to put the pieces together and make it fit. And pretty much you're noticing the things you didn't notice, like, oh, that was something I skipped over, with that look that crossed across their face, or when they said this, or oh gosh, they always hid that from me, or I somehow was, the computer would get closed when I walked in the room. And you're trying to put the pieces together, but you're doing it in a way most likely that's kind of blaming and shaming, like, oh, they were lying to me. They're such liars. They're such cheats, right? Or how could I be so stupid as to have tolerated that? So you're either blaming them or you're blaming yourself. But the problem with blame is that even if you're kind of accurate that something was fishy, that someone was unethical with you, that they were doing something completely unfair and shameful even. The problem is that any kind of shame conversation stops any kind of growth. So if you're shaming the other person, or even if you're shaming yourself, no one's growing from the experience. And that's where you get stuck in the loop and it doesn't get resolved. So where you want to go is, I like to say, even if it was 97% the other person's fault, you want to look at your 3%, because that's where the gold is for you. And the gold is going to be something like, wow, I minimized the red flags. I actually saw that and I explained it away. Or, wow, I gave my power away constantly. I was asking that person over and over, am I okay? Do you approve of me? Just giving my power away over and over again until there was hardly any of me left. Or, oh, my intuition knew on the third date that this area was going to be troublesome, and I just skipped over it. I just ignored it. I didn't engage it. I didn't want to make trouble. So I never asked about that area. You've got to look at that clearly and see how you yourself gave your power away in that relationship, because it's in identifying that clearly that you then can make an amends to yourself moving forward, and you can say, never again. Or from this moment forward, I will always do such and such. And that's really where you get to graduate and make meaning of the loss. The cost and consequences of our codependent, kind of toxic, manipulative, covert behaviors that were born from our wounds, like, no kidding, big time consequence to them. They're no small matter. It's no small matter to overgive as a way to try and prove your value constantly. It's no small matter to have all of your attention on the other person's feelings and needs and trying to fix those, completely self-abandoning your own. These things are big deals. So you might meet your soulmate, but if you're not healthy enough to create a positive, healthy dynamic with that person, there will be a huge consequence. So how do we live with, what feels like a very big prison sentence for some mistakes that we made, and where the mistakes almost feel small and insignificant to the hugeness of the punishment? And you can ask a lot of people who are in prison about the mistake that they made. Well, I was high. Well, it was a moment of passion. Well, I didn't really mean to. Well, I was kind of set up, or I knew I shouldn't be hanging out with those people. Sometimes life can be very harsh in its way of teaching us. But if you can really change your life from that, you take that 3% and you decide you're going to change all of your relationships. You're going to change how you relate to yourself. You're going to change how you relate to your kids, how you relate to your family, how you relate to your coworkers, how you relate to your friends, and certainly how you relate to anyone romantically moving forward. That's no small matter either. That just changed your life. In that way, that person became a message from God. They came to help you to graduate so that you could finally be free. The third step of conscious uncoupling is about changing the pattern that's been a lifelong pattern. So again, you see the through line of the internal work we're doing to come to a place of conscious completion inside of ourselves, to grow beyond who we were when we entered into that relationship, when we co-created that dynamic. What we're looking at in step 3 is the core beliefs that we formed in childhood that set us up to replay that pattern out in this relationship. It's not hard to find the beliefs usually in a breakup. Where you can go to find them is you simply say, well, where's the pain in my body that's not getting resolved? And it's going to be probably in your heart or in your solar plexus, or if you feel betrayed, it might be in between here, the small of your back, where you feel stabbed in the back, right? So you feel stabbed in the back, or so you say, well, where is the pain? And if the pain could talk and tell me the story about myself that's held in that emotional center, you're going to find very quickly, you're going to hear the stories like, I'm alone, everyone always leaves, or I'm invisible and no one cares about me, or I'm not safe and other people have ill intent, love is dangerous. There's some story that's being held. It's an old, ancient meaning. So you say to yourself then, how old are you? How old are you? And you're going to hear it quickly. I'm young. I'm like 3, I'm 4. Maybe I'm in the womb. I'm in the crib. And that's called your source fracture wound. So we want to identify, this is the story. This is the story that's been generating the pattern. How have you shown up in a way inside of that meaning, that default meaning, whenever you get disappointed or overwhelmed or frightened, you go back to that story. How have you then shown up in ways that have created it? Because we are the creators of our experience. And if you're centered in a story like that in consciousness, you will be showing up in ways that generate evidence for that story. So then you're looking at the relationship. Well, how did I recreate the I'm alone story in my relationship with my twin flame? How did I create that? I found the one person on the planet who is the most aligned with me, and I somehow duplicated the story that no one ever shows up for me and everyone always leaves. How did I create that? So we're not a victim of the universe. We're not a victim of our wounds. We're really looking from a place of self-responsibility at the actual ways that I showed up or didn't show up that generated that experience. Well, one way I created it was that when I was hurt, I didn't engage that well. I would just shut down, withhold my love, and put up a wall. And maybe that signaled the other person it was time for them to leave. Right? I dismissed them energetically rather than the very healthy experience of secure love, healthy love, happy love. When I'm hurt, I reach out and I tell the person, I'm hurt, I'm confused, please share with me. Can we talk about this? Because I'm left, I'm making it mean something that I don't know that you intended. Right? So you reach out, which for some of us is kind of counter instinctive or new behavior. So we have suddenly now a whole list of things that we need to learn to do differently in relationship in order to create a healthier experience moving forward. And part of it is to actually identify what's really true about me versus the story I created in response to childhood trauma. So the childhood trauma might be that I am alone because I was neglected as a child. But the deeper truth about me is that I came here to have loving relationships. I am born of love. I came here as a force of love, and I have the power to learn how to have healthier, happier connections that last over time. So you have to speak back to those old stories. And then you begin to connect with that younger you from your adult self. You say, sweetheart, that's not true. You're not alone. I'm right here. I'm with you. So there's a whole process that we need to do, Kay, in order to outgrow that pattern and graduate forever. This is where conscious uncoupling can promise people that you're going to have a deeper capacity to love and be loved moving forward, because you use the pain of the breakup to become very conscious about how you yourself have perpetuated patterns that no longer belong in your life, and put yourself on a growth trajectory to learn the new skills that were missing for you in childhood so that you can actually have healthier connections moving forward. Steps 4 and 5 then are now you're dealing with the other person. Um, Now, sometimes that's going to be physically because you're co parenting, or you own an organization together, or you're part of a community together, or it could just be in the way that you're holding them in your heart, right? Because we were talking before about how we're still really deeply connected to people. And so 4 is to become a love alchemist, and that's to recreate your relationship to be more appropriate to where things are now and where you're committed to going. So, in other words, you're now going to say that someone was my greatest teacher and they came to liberate me to live a full, beautiful life. And on a soul level, they're my biggest cheerleader. And on a soul level, I'm their biggest cheerleader. It's been determined that it's not for us to be together in this lifetime on the physical plane, but we can be together in our hearts and in our souls. See, I think this expectation that we should be with our twin flame is kind of a modern view of love. Um, I don't think that throughout most of human history, people expected to physically be able to marry and mate with their soulmate, their soul partner. As a matter of fact, about 400 years ago, people didn't want you to have love in your marriage because they thought love was too unstable. So marriage was about property and about community cohesion and about joining families together and about wealth. It was not about love. And as a matter of fact, when it started to be about love, there were huge outcries saying, no, 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 that's going to destabilize the culture, which it kind of has. They were kind of right about that. And then create right, and then creating happily even after is about designing structures where people are set up to win. You know, for my former husband and I, what an example of that is we decided to move into the same apartment building, so our daughter just had access free fly, to go to mom's apartment, dad's apartment. She had her room in dad's apartment because there were only 2 bedrooms and I needed an office, but um, she was free. We didn't have like a custody schedule, but every week he would generate a schedule, like this is what the expectation is this week, and does that work for you? So we always worked together on it, but it was a very free flowing thing. That was the one structure that we were able to create for happily even after. How does that work for everybody, where everybody has a sense of well-being, and our daughter isn't emotionally homeless, or she doesn't have access to one parent, or her loyalties are torn between parents, that kind of thing.
I love that. As I was reflecting on, step 4 and 5, and the question I find I so often have to prompt my clients with is this idea of, if, you know, based on love, if you could have it all your way, how would that go? And once we start to really sink into the, okay, this doesn't have, when we separate from the societal paradigm, this has to be hard, it's going to be painful, there has to be, deleting of Facebook profiles and, you know, arguments and all of this. Once we detach from that, as you said early on, there's this freedom here to look at, okay, well, if that's not what this has to be, what is it going to take within me to have something different occur? Oh, I got to give up the story that they're a monster. Oh, I got to deal with the fact that, I've been financially supported and it's time for me to earn. There's all these, in order to create what we truly want, we have to be willing to become who we've never been.
I love that, Gabe. How beautifully said.
So,
Yeah.
one of the things I really love about the book is that it provides the prompts for those kinds of questions. And it gives us the opportunity to look at, okay, what do I have to be willing to look at that I maybe, the structure of my life didn't force me to look at until this separation occurred, until this invitation to complete occurred. So I'm going to stop here. And we have a few minutes left. So I want to say, first of all, a big thank you. This is such important work. And whether there's like a completion for you at the moment with your twin soul or soulmate connection or whatever you want to label your connection, if there is a completion point, there is an opportunity to do it in love. There is a better way, a new way. And Katherine's work will show you how. Before we get into questions, so start generating your questions while I'm waiting for those questions to come in the chat. I want to go ahead and share with you how you can find out more about Katherine as you're ready. So you can find Katherine's work here at consciousuncoupling.com/book. And you can see the books access here, the 5 steps that she just walked through here. In addition to that, though, if you just go to consciousuncoupling.com, you'll be able to see there's a little starter kit here. So if you're like, okay, I need to be in this conversation, Katherine's got some free ways for you to get started, which is awesome. And simultaneously, if you're called to work in the arena of relationships, she has a way for you to start moving into coaching if this is something that feels aligned for you as a next step. You can become a conscious uncoupling coach, or you can find someone to work with who can walk you through this process in your own life. And if you'd like, you can also consult with Katherine. That option is here as well. And if this isn't your conversation, if you are, let's just pop on over here to Katherine's main website, katherinewoodwardthomas.com. You can also step into the Calling in the One conversation as well, and move toward how do you create, if you're ready to have that conversation about new love, expanded love, a love that includes the person that you're separating from and the love that you might start to live with coming forward, this conversation is probably more aligned for you. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into listener Q&A. Katherine, you ready?
I am. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I really appreciate you being here. Okay, so let me just see. Christina asks, what's your advice on conscious uncoupling 2 years after the actual breakup
Mhm.
and when the other person completely shut you out?
Yeah. Oh, ouch.
Yeah.
That's the worst. Christina, it's very common for people to do conscious uncoupling a few years after the breakup, where you kind of get time doesn't necessarily heal all wounds and that there's work for you to do. So it's a very active process. I think when Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin kicked conscious uncoupling into the lexicon, it really was wonderful. It was a wonderful blessing because it let people know about the work. But I think that people also had a misunderstanding that it means solely two people who were probably going to do this well anyway, do it together, in sync with each other. And that's rarely the case. I would say that 90 to 95% of people who are doing conscious uncoupling come to it alone because they are still haunted by the past relationship. They're um, finding themselves unresolved. They're dreaming about the person. They're telling that person often their mind when they're driving down the freeway. So there's just an incompletion, and it's very hard for us to complete, as I said before, because nature has kind of designed us to stay connected. And if we're not physically connected, nature will do all sorts of things to keep us just even psychically connected. So we have to find a way to really put it to rest. And even the choice that this other person made of being out of communication, the meaning that you make of that and how you deal with that. And I don't know that you have to tolerate that void. I think that there's a way we can always have access to people on a soul level. I teach people how to do what I call a soul to soul meditation, where you bring in the consciousness, the core consciousness of the person, and you in a formal ritual safe way. I teach you how to do that in a way that's safe for those of you who have fear of your former partner, but in a dignified way, in a way that can restore you back to wholeness, where you get to have a conversation with that person. And I share a story about that too in the book in step 4, where I had been that relationship I mentioned before, where I'd been severed for 20 something years and had still dreamt about him. I did this soul to soul meditation at the end of that 20 something year period, when I was doing Calling in the One, when I was first creating Calling in the One. As part of my process, I looked at, well, who do I have agreements with that might be getting in the way of me manifesting a really happy, healthy, loving relationship? And I realized I was incomplete with this person, but I didn't want to call him because I hadn't talked to him in 2 decades, and he had 3 kids and a wife, and it wasn't appropriate. So I did a soul to soul, and I had this beautiful, heartfelt dialogue really in my imagination. But I did it very ritualized, and I had candles and sacred objects. And when I completed the conversation, I felt free. And I went on to manifest a beautiful relationship. And I'll tell you, 8 years later, I ended up speaking to this man. I hadn't talked to him in almost 30 years at that point, but we got to reconnect, and we had a very heart to heart conversation. And I got to really share with him how much I'd missed him for all those years and apologize for the traumatic way that we broke up. He apologized to me, and then he shared that he also dreamt about me for many years, and that it was an issue in his marriage. And I thought to ask him the question: when did that stop? When did your dreams stop and your longing for me stop? And he said, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. So it was when I did the soul to soul meditation. So I think, Einstein called it spooky. What do you call it? Spooky action at a distance or something like
Yeah.
that. This non-locality and how connected we are. So if you're being, just because somebody gives the keys to the condo back doesn't mean it's the end of the connection. So if you're being tortured by a previous relationship, there's ways to complete it where you're no longer suffering with that person. And I really do go into, the depth that I'm going into in the conversation. This is the introduction to conscious uncoupling. So, so it's very specific because I'm very committed to you being free. I'm very committed to love, and very committed to all of us being able to not just feel healthy and well in our relational field, because I feel that we need that in order to realize our full potentials in life. But I'm also committed to love because I think it's the way to evolve who we have collectively been, to be able to deal with the challenges that we're facing in our world. So to me, it's the best investment of our energy and our time is to evolve our collective capacity to love and be loved.
Extraordinary. Thank you. One of the gifts I have found, for myself, just being in a twin soul connection, is that recognition that love, when it's actually love, comes with freedom. I love you enough to want you to have what your soul is showing you is best for you, even if that is not with me. That's how deep, profound, enriching love's power is. It's the power to set yourself and others free. So I really appreciate that you have shared what your experience is here. That's a great question, Christina. Do you have room for one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Shay Israel shares that she has been with her husband for over 22 years. We should have had a completion decade or more ago. We
Mhm.
have a large family of 10. What do you suggest? I've evolved. He's on his own journey. Our journey together is over. I
Wow.
haven't been able to end it because he'll be hurt and I want the family to have harmony. This is precisely why I said, okay, I have to interview Katherine for this question here.
Did she say she has 10 children?
We have a large family of 10.
Oh,
So
a large family
it
of
might
10
include,
grandchildren or
yeah.
okay, okay, great. Well, it's a beautiful question because, relationships don't just belong to the two people in them. Relationships belong to a community of others, and that's a great example. And what's our friend's name?
Shay Israel. Shay.
Shay. Okay. Hi, Shay. So I'm going to suggest that it sounds to me like you're kind of doing a lot of the processing alone out of relationship with him, where you're thinking and you're trying to solve the problem. I'm going to suggest that you back up several steps and and really just go back to the experience that you're having without the conclusion. It seems to me that the conclusion you've come to is that the marriage should end. And now the problem you're facing is how to end the marriage. So I'm going to invite you to go back and just talk about, really connect with the feelings of that we are out of sync and we're no longer the right partners for each other. And think about how you can, what the emotional experience of that is for you, and then start to share that so that the two of you can come to that conclusion that it's right to separate maybe together. Now, you might end up disagreeing, but at least you're including him. Like he might say, no, I think we've been together long enough. And even though the marriage has kind of changed, we should just stay together for the family. He might come to that conclusion. But in doing that, Shay, you're including him in the conversation. Why I like you doing that is because when you present it to the others, there's more alignment between the two of you. And that's gonna go well. I mean, I think the reason why uh, people kind of fall apart in the community and in sharing with other people very often is because of the misalignment between the two people. So if you are coming to conclusion without him, you haven't really given him a chance. So look, even to say, I find myself coming to the conclusion, but where you're not actually completely at the conclusion, you give that person a chance to express themselves, to say a different opinion, to generate something new, but you're in it together, and that's going to create more alignment. And then you're just honest and you're saying, I think it's too late. I'm not feeling it. I can't feel you anymore. I don't feel those feelings for you anymore. I love you. I don't love you in that way anymore. But you're giving the person some sense of your own process so that they're not just taken out by the decision that you've made without them. So when you're able to do that, then you have a better shot of going to the family. We have decided, we think that this is how this could go, and this is how we would like our family to be moving forward. We'd like to share holidays. We'd like to stay best friends. We'd like to stay move into a brother-sister dynamic, and then you're just training people how to relate to you, and people will adjust as long as what pulls families apart is the hostility, the animosity, the unresolved rage, the pulling on people for torn loyalties, those kinds of things. If you have already managed to get through those conversations together where you've been able to minimize that, then your family's going to stand a chance of staying a cohesive family unit, even post divorce. That's happily even after.
Beautiful answer. Thank you for that. And it's just, the question continues to become like, what would love do here? Well, love includes people in the conversation.
Mhm.
And the part that you didn't mention, but that's written underneath all of this, is the need to face whatever fears that we might have about being with the messy parts of our own feelings. Just being with ourselves and those feelings is an act of love. And that's the first step, is being willing to just be with, okay, I want to have this conversation with you. This is, the way I feel when you respond in certain ways. I feel dismissed, and then being willing to go back and stand for ourselves again. That act of self love of, here's where I'm at. I'm fully connected to me, and I will be connected to you with exactly where I'm at.
Beautiful.
It's hard to do. And it's so, as painful as it is to think of breaking up a marriage, for so many of us, we find that easier than simply being present with our pain with another human being present and witnessing it.
Mhm.
But that is truly the greatest act of self love, and love for the connection and the other person. And I agree. I think that's a beautiful starting place. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Um, so we're going to have to conclude here. Catherine, beloved, thank you. Fellow warrioress of love, thank you.
What a great joy to meet you. You're precious. I've loved being a part of whatever it is that you're up to. I love your wisdom and
Whatever's going on over there on that channel, this is good.
thanks for having me as part of this series, Kay. I really appreciate it. And lots of love to everybody.
Such a gift, Catherine. Thank
Mhm.
you so much. Take great
Mhm.
care, everyone. Bye
Bye.
for now.